I am so excited to bring Dr. D to you, as I lovingly refer to him. He is the foremost expert on human behavior and potential that I have ever come across. He is a polymath. His genuine, authentic care is immeasurable. And I'm so honored to share him and his genius with you.
Are you ready for a wild ride? I'm Alexis Artin, and I invite you to strap in because this is more than a podcast. This is Look at Me Now. Hello, everybody. I have such a treat for you today. I'm fangirling a little bit. I've got Dr. Demartini here on the podcast with me. Look at Me Now. So for those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Demartini, he is the leading authority on human behavior and leadership development. He is a polymath who has beyond 4 decades of cross-disciplinary research around the world and is the foremost expert on human potential. I could go on and on and on and on, but I'd rather just talk to the man himself, who is, to me, the greatest influence on the work that I'm doing in the world. And I'm so inspired to have him on the podcast and share him with you. Hello, Dr. Demartini. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I was looking forward to it.
Yes, absolutely. So this podcast really is so influenced by things that I have learned directly from you through the years. And the whole concept of the podcast is really about human resilience and our ability to have self-agency. And so often we are able to claim that within ourselves as we are inspired to do so by lessons that we learn. And you have a really remarkable story that I think can inspire many. So the way that we do on this podcast, that is we start by looking at the past. And you have a really remarkable story that I would love for everybody to bear witness to. So if you could start by sharing about the origin story that you have of being born with certain defects or dyslexia or illiteracy. Can you start there with us?
Okay. I was born in 1954, so I'm going on 70 this year. And when I was about a year and a half old, I remember having to go to a speech pathologist and have to put strings and buttons in my mouth because my muscles weren't properly using to make sounds. When I was also born with an arm and leg, internally rotated arm and leg. So I had to wear a brace on my left arm and leg till I was around 4. And I'd fall over walking if I didn't do that. And then I got into elementary school, the kindergarten class, they called it. And I, for some reason, liked to draw with the girls and didn't want to draw with the boys. And the teacher didn't like that. So she made me draw in the center of the room between the boys and the girls, which I thought was metaphorically accurate because I was the middle path guy. And
Sure.
First grade, I was told by Mrs. McLaughlin that I looks like I'm, she had to have my parents come to the school and says, because no matter what I did, I wasn't learning how to read. And I was having pronunciation and I wrote with my arm backwards. I wrote backwards. So I had dyslexia. And I was told by my teacher that I'm afraid your son is not going to be able to read or write or communicate effectively, probably won't go very far because of it and won't probably amount to much. But he likes to run because when I got 4 years old and I got out of my braces, all I wanted to do is run. To catch up with being you're constrained by braces, you want to run. So I was pretty good at running, but that's about it. And I made it through elementary school by asking the smartest kids. One became a dentist, one became a pulmonary specialist, the smartest kids. What did they get out of the class? And if they told me something, I could pick up enough information from what they were saying to kind of get through elementary school. And that worked till I was around 12. I would pass by asking questions and staying late with the teachers and asking teachers questions. So I was trying alternative strategies not to be humiliated because it was a bit humiliating I was the only kid that didn't have a star on the reading chart. The only kid.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
that was a bit challenging. Then I left home. I left home when I was 13. And 14, I hitchhiked out to California from Houston, Texas to go surfing because I could stand on a surfboard. And I lived in California and down in Mexico for 14 as a street kid. And then at 15, I made my way panhandling money in Huntington Beach, California. I made enough money to fly to Hawaii. And I first lived under a bridge, then in a park bench, then in a bathroom, then an abandoned car, finally a tent, kept social climbing. And I was riding big waves in Hawaii. And I was developing a skill that I could excel at because I was pretty good at it. And, but then I nearly died when I was 17, riding a big wave. And I almost died and my diaphragm stopped. And I had strychnine poisoning and I didn't know it was affecting my diaphragm. And then I was led to a health food store and led to a yoga class. And Paul C. Bragg's amino acids, was a guest speaker there. And one night, this one man with one message in 1 hour spoke to me in a way that nobody has ever spoken to me.
Mm.
He said that, we have a body, we have a mind, and we have a soul. The body must be directed by the mind must be guided by the soul. The soul is your authentic self. And to maximize your potential. And that you want to set goals for yourself, your family, your community, your city, your state, your nation, and your world and beyond for 100 to 120 years. Whoa, no one's ever said anything like that to me. And he said that what you think about, what you visualize, what you affirm, what you feel, and what you take actions on can change your destiny. So if you think differently, visualize differently, everything else. So the way he spoke, it was so certain that I thought that night that he was speaking to me. And he took us through a guided imagery meditation, an alpha meditation experience. And in that meditation, I saw myself standing on a balcony in front of 1 million people over a giant square with 1 million people below, with an iconic building from every major city around the world. And I saw this vision of wanting to be a teacher and inspire people. And it was like, what? It's like left field. It was like, imagined I was going to make surfboards. And I didn't have any idea that was going to surface that night. And I'm going to bring up a picture so you can see the picture, because I had a famous painter ask if he could paint the picture of what I saw that night. I'm going to see if I can find it here. I never know what I'm going to be interviewed about, so I didn't have it prepared, but
that's okay.
But I'm going to see if
take your time, because we can always edit the pause out. So no worries. Take your time. Yeah. We'd love to see it.
Here we go. Here's the picture. So this is the image. A gentleman in Melbourne, Australia, heard me speak about this. Somebody asked me about my journey, and I spoke about this moment. And he came up to me afterwards and he said, "Can I paint that for you?"
Mm.
And I said, "Wow, that would be inspiring." So he did. He painted the vision that I saw.
Oh, wow. That is exquisite.
And it's 1 million people standing on a balcony with an iconic building from every major city around the world. It was the name of the painting is "A Man on a Mission with a Vision and a Message."
Wow. That is inspiring.
Tell me, when I received that in my office, that sits in my office today in Houston. When I received that, I just got tears in my eyes. I couldn't stop tearing.
I'm sure.
So anyway, that night was the first night in my life that I thought maybe I could overcome my learning problems and that I could someday become intelligent.
Mm.
And I thought, when I saw that vision, it felt destined. It felt like there was something, I was a pawn on a chess set. Something was about to happen. And I felt that was too lucid a vision to ignore. And so at the end of the talk, he said, every morning I do a talk, Fort DeRussy there in Waikiki, or and sometimes in Wahiawa, I do it there. So the next morning, I was 5 o'clock in the morning, I was hitchhiking into town to join him. And for every morning for the next 2 weeks until he left, I did everything I could to learn from this guy. And he's the one that told me on the last day when he was about to leave, he says, I'm going back to Santa Barbara area and I hope to see you all again. And I was like going, whoa, the mentor that's inspired me is about to go. And I was thinking, am I going to go back to where I was? Or is this, because this is really inspiring me, talking to this guy, meeting with this guy. And he said to me, when I told him that I saw a vision that night about being a speaker and I don't know how to read. I've never read a book in my life. And I have speech impediments and I've got learning difficulties. And he smiled at me and he looked at me and he said, do you have any other problems, young man? I said, no, sir. He said, that's not a problem. I went, okay. He says, I want you to do this one thing and do it every single day and never miss a day for the rest of your life. He says, I want you to say to yourself, I am a genius and I apply my wisdom. And I thought, I didn't even really know what a genius was. Didn't even know what that meant. But he made me say that. And he made me say it until my eyes closed, until I could feel what that might be. And he patted me on the shoulder and he says, never miss a day the rest of your life. Now, that was 51 years and 3 months ago. Wow. Almost 3 months. And I've never missed a day. I learned, I came back from Hawaii and within months, just a matter of months later, I hitchhiked. Well, I flew back to Los Angeles, hitchhiked back to Texas, came to my parents' house. I had long hair and a beard. They didn't even recognize me. And came into the house. The door was open and I just walked in. I didn't think about I might shock them. But my mom was cooking some prunes and she looked over her shoulder and she goes, is that you? And they encouraged me to take a GED, a high school equivalency test. I told them that they said, what brought you back home? And I said, I saw a vision and I want to follow that vision and I want to overcome my learning problems. So they encouraged me to take a GED and I miraculously passed by guessing, closing my eyes. I couldn't even read half the questions. I closed my eyes. I said, I'm a genius and I apply my wisdom. I took my pencil and I just filled in a bunch of dots that I figured I got nothing to lose. If I fail, I got nothing to lose. I am not any worse off. If I get somewhere, I got me a high school degree. So I passed this thing, miraculously passed. And that was so amazing because I'm now at the same level if I would have continued school. I dropped out of school. I'd been out of school for 4 years. And now all of a sudden I've got me a high school degree. And they thought that would help me get a job, right? Well, then they said, well, why don't you do the same thing and try to go to college? This summer, the waves don't come back in Hawaii until October. Why don't you take advantage of the summer and try out a college class? I couldn't go to a university. I had to go to a junior college. And I took 2 classes. I didn't want to overdo it, English and history. And I took this history class, Dr. Baker, and I had no idea how to take notes. I wasn't current. And he was talking a mile a minute. And I just figured I'm going to listen and I'm going to say I'm a genius and I'm applying my wisdom and I'm going to pass that test like I did. And I, 2 weeks into the class, because it's a 6-week class for summer, 2 weeks in, I got my first test. And the next day, I went over there to see the results. And I thought it would be alphabetical by name, but it was by score. The 100 is at the top. And I kept going down 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 and I kept going down. And then there's this giant gap. The lowest score was like 76. And then there was this giant gap and there was down at the bottom was 27. And that was me. And when I got that grade, I was humiliated. And all I could hear is my first grade teacher saying, he'll never read, write, or communicate.
Mm.
And I was I ran to my car. I sunk in the car because there were people around. And I didn't want to be seen crying. And I finally started my car and drove home. And I got home and there was nobody there. My mom was out. My dad was at work and my mom was shopping. And I went and curled up in a fetal position underneath this Bible stand and just cried. And was really thinking, this whole thing is an illusion. You know, I'm going to end up surfing. And I was in this turmoil because I was thinking, I guess I don't have what it takes. I could hear the first grade teacher whispering in my head. I felt I was letting my parents down. Felt like I was delusioned. Like, who am I? I'm going to be a great teacher, sure. I saw this great vision, yeah. And my mom came home from shopping and she saw me crying on the floor. She hadn't seen me cry since I was a teenager, or 12, 13, when I left home. And she said, "What happened, son?" And I said, "I blew the test. I guess I don't have what it takes." And I requoted what the first grade teacher said. "I'm afraid I'll never read, write, or communicate, never amount to thing, never go very far in life." And she just sat there and listened. Didn't say anything, didn't know what to say. And finally, she spoke up and she put her hand on my shoulder and she said, "Son, whether you become a great teacher, healer, and philosopher and travel the world like you say you want to do, you dream, whether you return to Hawaii and ride big waves, which you've done, or return to the streets and panhandle as a bum, which you've done, I just want to let you know that your father and I are going to love you no matter what you do." When she said that, which was the perfect thing to say at that moment, I mean, you could not said it anything more magnificent. My hand went into a fist. I looked up, and in my mind's eye, I saw that painting. There was no painting yet. I just saw the vision in my mind. And I said to myself, I'm going to master this thing called reading, studying, and learning. I'm going to master this thing called teaching, healing, and philosophy. And I'm going to do whatever it takes, travel whatever distance, and pay whatever price to give my service of love across this planet. And I'm not going to let any human being on the face of this planet stop me now, not even myself. I got up and I hugged my mom, and I walked into my room, and I got a Funkin' Wagnall's dictionary. In those days, if you bought $20 worth of food at Kroger's, you got a volume of an encyclopedia or a dictionary. Oh. I got this dictionary, and I made a commitment to read that dictionary word by word all the way through and memorize the friggin' book. And so I started doing 30 words a day. And the way I did is I got a pad of paper. This is a pad, small one, but and I wrote the word 20 times. And I committed to 30 words. So that's 600 writings. And then I wrote the sentence with that word in it 20 times. And then I looked at the pronunciation and I practiced doing it until I could make the proper sound because it has it in front of it.
Yeah.
And then I had to explain the meaning. And my mom would test me on 30 words a day, test me on the 30 words and made sure I can say it, spell it, put it in a sentence, and explain the meaning of it. And it was inspiring to work and do this 30 words a day. And as you do, if you add that up at the end of 2 years, add those numbers up. 30 words a day times 365 days, 30 times 300, it starts adding up. So we're talking about thousands of words I put into my brain. The average person has anywhere from a really uneducated, illiterate person, maybe 300 words, to probably 6,000 words. I'm now 3 times that. And in 2 years, during that time, I went to the top of the class. I literally came back and I rallied because I had a desire to learn. Most of the kids in their 18, 19, and 20s are party animals. They were doing studies for You had occasional really dedicated students, right? They're like 1 out of 100, 1 out of 200 maybe.
Maybe.
Most of them are just wanting to go and get drunk and party and do the bare minimum, get a degree,
That's right.
because your parents said so. I wanted to learn. I wanted to read. I wanted to know. So I lived in the library. I was living in dictionaries, reading books, any word I could get, anything I could do, I was studying. And within a very short period of time, I kept asking what worked and what didn't work in learning every day. I learned how to read faster and faster and faster, absorb information more. And people started asking me questions. So literally by the time, before I was finished even 18 years old, I started having people asking me, can you teach me whatever you're doing? The first student I ever had was a 375-pound Afro-American woman and asked me to teach her how to do yoga because I had learned some yoga in Hawaii. And so to me, having somebody ask me to teach was unbelievably an honor. And so another guy asked me to teach him meditation because I knew how to do meditation and some yoga a little bit, not much, but enough where they were intrigued. Nobody was doing that in those days. In 1973, nobody was doing yoga and going around with bottled water. I had bottled water in those days. Nobody carried bottled water. I was doing what Paul
Nobody
Bragg
ever
told me to
accused
do.
you of not being ahead of your time, sir.
So I was carrying bottled water and doing yoga and fasting and eating natural foods and doing what Paul Bragg taught me. And I think that's why I think, most people think I'm younger than 70 because of that. But I think that in the process of doing that, speaking became, and all of a sudden I was in the library and people used to come to the library and said, can you tutor us? And I started teaching. And then when I went on to the University of Houston after that, I used to do yoga out in this field where these trees are between the buildings. And people were intrigued by me because I was I still had long hair and they thought I was a weird kind of looking guy in 1973, 5. And I was doing yoga and meditation and stuff, and they'd gather around and start asking me questions. So I would have 100 to 150 people. Sometimes it swelled to 400 people every day under the trees. And if it rained, we went to the cafeteria and they'd all come in there. And I started having a following of people asking questions and having dialogues. And I was just devouring and reading 18 to 20 hours a day is a typical reading day for me at that time. And I was just learning everything I could. And that is how my speaking career started to develop. And anybody who would ask me to speak, I'd grab it, because it was like my dream. And now I've been to a lot of countries. I mean, I won't say all of them. There's just about 20 left that I haven't been to speaking at. I'll be in Uruguay tomorrow.
It is it's such an inspiring story. And I'm so grateful that there were so many details that you just shared that I didn't know. I knew a majority of it, but there were so many little details that you just shared that were even new to me and even more inspiring. I'm so curious. Can you walk us through bridging the gap between that beginning of your speaking roots through developing this method? How did you, for those of you who don't know, what I believe will win a Nobel Prize, the Demartini method. And and I encourage everybody to look it up and to be curious about it. But can you walk me into how you developed that method?
Well, I am 18 years old. I came and asked my mom, what exactly is a genius? And she said, people like Albert Einstein and Leonardo da Vinci. And I said, well, then get me every book you can on them. And there was a book by Albert Einstein that I'd gotten, and he said that I'm not a man of my family. I'm not a man of my community. I'm not a man of my city. I'm not a man of my state. I'm not a man of my nation. I'm a citizen of the world. And I live on a ship called the world. and I'm a citizen of the world, partly because of that moment. I travel all over the world because of it. So that had an influence. I wanted to have a global perspective. If you want to make a difference in yourself, you need to have a vision at least as big as your family. If you want to make a difference in your family, you need a vision as big as your community. If you want to make a difference in your community, you need a big vision as big as your city. You want to make a difference in your city, you need a vision as big as your state. If you want to make a difference in the state, you need a national vision. If you want to make a difference in the nation, you need a global vision. If you want to make a difference on the planet, you need an astronomical vision. So I wanted to have an astronomical vision. That was one factor. Also at that time, I was watching David Carradine on Kung Fu show, which, and he talked about the Shaolin master that he studied under.
Mm-hmm.
And whenever we talk about the master, I thought, I want to be a master. So in my mind, I said, I want to be a master of life. I want to wake up my genius, and I want to have an astronomical vision so I can make a global difference. So that was part of it. Then, as I got to close to 19 years old, my mom said to me, son, what do you want for your birthday and for Christmas? Because I was born on Thanksgiving Day, a month before Christmas. What do you want for Christmas and your birthday? I said, Mom, I want the greatest teachings on the face of the earth, the greatest writings humanity's ever created by the greatest minds who ever lived. And she said, you sure you don't want a T-shirt? I said, no, I want knowledge. I want the greatest knowledge on the planet. And she said, well, let me see what I can do. So she had a brother named Uncle Ralph, and he was a professor at MIT and a physicist and chemist for Shell Oil Company also. Brilliant mind. And she contacted him and said, my son, as you know, who had learning problems, is learning how to read. And he's asked for the greatest teachings on the face of the earth, the greatest minds who's ever lived, the greatest writings. What do I do? And he said, let me see what I can do. And he sent 2 giant 6 by 6 by 6 foot wooden crates on a flatbed truck to our home with thousands of books in it. It was a friggin' library. And I remember going out there with a crowbar and opening this thing up, and these books, I filled my room with books. I mean, stacked books. I had a little yoga mat to look out the window in, and just books everywhere. And in one of those books, one of the books he gave me was The Discourse on Metaphysics by Leibniz, the German philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. He also gave me Theodicy and also monadology from him, but that one book. And as I read that, the very first chapter, very first paragraph, Leibniz said that the perfection of the universe could never be improved upon by human beings. And I thought, what an interesting perspective. And I really loved Leibniz. His ideas just really made sense to me. And I had to pull out dictionaries and look up all the words because he was way more advanced than I was. And then I read another book because that gave me an idea that there was a hidden order in the perfection. Because I looked at what exactly does that mean? That led me back to Einstein and his book on Brownian movement. That led me to Ludwig Boltzmann in the thermodynamics and Clausius. And Boltzmann said that the mathematics of disorder is not an actual description of the universe, it's our interpretation of it. And Claude Shannon said that the information is missing in our minds, and therefore we don't see the whole order. We see there's missing information, which is disorder. He said, but there's a hidden order, and I was interested in what that hidden order is. I also got a book from him called The Principles of Quantum Mechanics, 1947, by Paul Dirac, Nobel Prize winner. Now that's a book you had to have a lot of dictionaries with, and you had to go through and I mean, it was a technical book, but I took each word, and I was in heaven in a sense. Every time I get to learn a new word, it was like amazing. So I just went through, and sometimes I'd take a whole sentence and there'd be 7 words in there I had to go look up. But I went through, and in there, he was the one that created the idea of a particle has an antiparticle. It was another way of interpreting Einstein's E equals mc squared, because there had to be a positive and negative solution to it. And there was a complex mathematics talking about in Schrodinger's equation about pairs of opposites. So the perfection and the pairs of opposites at 18 going on 19, right at 19, started the journey of, I want to know how do you find the hidden order in the apparent chaos. And I want to find the symmetry and elegant mathematical expression of this divine perfection, as Leibniz described. So that catalyzed me to start probing every imaginable discipline I could to try to find out how I could put that together and help that in the brain. That led me to studying the brain and studying physics and mathematics and you name it, religions and philosophers. It led me to Heraclitus and the unity of opposites. It led me to the dialectic by Zeno and the pair of propositions. And it led me into psychology by William James and talking about there's never a future without a past and a past without a future. And I started synthesizing these writings and started experimenting. And the first realization came in a Sumerian and Egyptian and Aramaic and Hebrew terminologies that whatever you judge in others you have, you do the same thing. 3 fingers pointing back at yourself. So the very beginning of the Demartini method was, whatever you judge in others, where do you do it inside yourself? And I used to take every judgment that a person could think of. They pick somebody, and every judgment you could think about that you judged in them, that you liked or disliked, didn't matter which side it was, make a list of everything you admire and despise in this person. And then let's go find out where you do the same things to the same degree. And that led me to the Oxford Dictionary. In the Oxford Dictionary, there was the largest dictionary I could find. Very thin print, small print, very thin paper. And I decided to, instead of waiting to discover where I had everything I saw in other people, I decided to preemptive strike it and go and find out what are all the possible human behavioral traits that have been defined in English. Mm-hmm. And then go and find out who do I know that displays that trait to the fullest, the most extreme. And then I went inside and I found out where do I have that to the same degree as I see in them. And I went through 4,628 individual traits many, many years ago, 40 years ago plus, and found out I had all the traits. And that made me stop and realize that the only trait we react to with an infatuation or resentment that we see in others are the traits we're too humble or too proud to admit we have within ourselves. So then I was determined to own all the traits. And after owning all the traits found in the English dictionary, I made a conclusion that nothing's missing in human beings. But sometimes they're too proud or too humble to admit what they see in others is inside themselves. And that is the voids of emptiness that drive their values in the pursuit of trying to rediscover who they are, which is all the things. You're everything. Nothing's missing. Mm-hmm. And so that was the first step in the Demartini method, just that. And it was just, you wrote out 75 to 100 positive negatives on somebody and you own them all. It was just 4 columns. And I called it the retrogenesis process originally, because in Genesis, there was man separates from God, then man separates into man and woman, and then it goes into good and evil. So I thought if I could take a positive, negative trait, good and evil, and I could merge the male and female androgyny, and I could unify that and then see that whatever is outside was equal to self, could I have people have a divine experience, a spiritual experience? And guess what? People started having tears of grace and gratitude and love when they finished the exercise. And I was like, there's something here. This is practical.
There's something there.
There's something there. I was like, this is not just theory. This is practical. Then I realized that the traits that were labeled good or bad were, if you study, I'm writing right now a big textbook on morality, the evolution of morality, history of morality right now. I'm in the middle of it. Well, not middle, but early phase of it. I just finished another textbook on the brain and neurology. But I'm writing a book on morality, the evolution of morality and how it developed as a reflection of the education and the evolution of the brain.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized that at the lowest levels of morality is black and white absolutist thinking, very subjectively biased, survival, amygdala, valent assigning polarities. And that's where all the source of conflicts are in the world. I'm right, you're wrong, and the addiction to pride and the addiction to fantasies about how life's supposed to be. And the highest level of the morality, the transcendent morality, as Kohlberg would describe, transcending it is abiding by universal laws, not human laws. Human laws nobody can live by, and most everybody violates. But universal laws nobody can violate, and everybody follows whether they're conscious of it or not. Nobody's violating gravity. They're not violating the impact radiation has. They're not violating certain laws of physics. But everybody violates the human laws, which are moral hypocrisies and idealisms about how life's supposed to be, which are tribal and territorial and local, and they only have transient periods of time, and they're changing. Just like in America, at one time, drugs were illegal, and now that's legal again. You get to smoke pot today.
Exactly.
So those are changing. So moral laws are changing. They're transient. But most people subordinate to the collective authorities, and as a result of that, get trapped in the moral hypocrisies. And that's where a lot of the judgments and disempowerments of human beings and all the conflicts and social biases and prejudices and you name it. So I decided to do an honest evaluation on the traits, going back to the Oxford Dictionary. And the trait, I automatically, when I wrote the traits down, the 4,628 traits, I assumed they were good and bad traits. But then I went in there from a new perspective. Instead of seeing an absolutist, I came in there from a universalist view perspective, a relativist, and looking what are the benefits of the trait I thought was terrible and what are the drawbacks of the trait I thought were terrific. Like, let's say you're really nice to a child and being generous to him, but now the child's dependent, obligated, not driven, entitled, and there's a drawback to the generosity. So we think, oh, generosity is good. No, it isn't. It has its downsides. And not being generous and stingy has its benefits. People have to be resourceful. They have to think for themselves. They have to become entrepreneurs. They have to figure it out themselves. So I realize that these illusions of good and bad are arbitrary, and they're based on the oppressor over the oppressed and the group of people that come up with them, and they're variable and depending on who the leaders are, and those are changing based on who has the most power at the time. And so I then started to realize and started to help people take the traits they thought were terrible and ask, in that moment that they displayed it, what are the upsides? What are the benefits? Mm-hmm. How are they serving your highest value and helping you fulfill your mission in life? And it shocked people. Well, it doesn't. And then they looked again and they found it. And how is it a drawback, this trait? And I go, well, it's a good trait. How can there be any drawbacks to it? They're black and white thinking. And when you're in black and white thinking, you have no resilience. See, when you infatuate with somebody, you fear their loss. When you resent somebody, you fear their gain. When you're absolute positive, you fear its loss. And if it's absolute negative, you fear its gain. And this is exactly what some religious fundamentalists are trying to promote in people to make them easy to control, because you control people with black and white thinking. You can't control a resilient individual like Gandhi. So all of a sudden, I started thinking, what are the upsides to what I thought were down and what are the downs? And I went through all those traits and neutralized them. And then I realized that the only buttons people can push on me are the ones I disown and have a charge on. And that's exactly what the amygdala does in the subcortical area of the brain. It assigns valency and stores it as a memory in the subconscious mind to make sure that we don't lose food and don't get eaten by predator. It's a survival strategy. And so I basically transcended that and realized that it's neither good nor evil. At the level of the soul, the state of unconditional love, the authentic self, nothing's missing in you. And there's neither good nor evil. It's unconditional. And everybody wants to be loved for who they are, for both sides, simultaneously. Wilhelm once said that that simultaneous contrast is where self-actualization lives, and sequential contrast is where our amygdala lives. So as long as we're judging, we eventually discover the thing we infatuate with, that we don't see the downsides. A day, a week, or a month, or 3 months later, we go, oh, now I see the downsides. Ooh, I was blind, ignorant.
Mm.
And if I'm infatuated or resentful, I eventually discover, hey, that was a turning point in my life. Thank God that occurred. So instead of waiting for the wisdom of the ages with the aging process, I started to extract out space and time from the mind and help people see that there was neither good nor evil, and that everything they perceived was them, and that was a projection. And pure reflective awareness was liberating to people. And if you have deflective awareness and you disown it and you're too proud or too humble and you're judging them, then you're having them run your life. You're extrinsically run. And people who are extrinsically run offload their decisions to other people, and they're subordinate. I found out that people who lived more neutrality, their physiology and psychology ran their life, not sociology and theology ran their life. Religion, politics runs the people who are judging, and their physiology and intuition masterfully run people who are loving. And so that was the second step in the method. The third step was realizing that since I've done the same thing and it's bad or good in them, then I must be living in the idea that I'm proud or shamed in me. Because if I'm judging them and I'm doing it, but I'm not aware of it, I'm carrying around prides and shames. And if I'm proud, I activate my narcissistic side and I don't have fair exchange and sustainability in my relationship. And when I'm shamed, I activate my altruistic side, sacrificing for people until I build up resentment and I have non-sustainability. So I realized I needed to clear those. So I started going finding out what were the benefits or the drawbacks to when I did something I thought I was ashamed of or proud of. And I neutralized those. Because those were illusions too, but I was carrying those illusions. And I found out repeatedly that if I dissolved my shame, my resentment to others disappeared without having to do anything. And if I dissolved my pride, my infatuation of being hooked by infatuations dissolved. So I realized that the world on the outside was definitely a reflection of what was going on the inside. And as a result of that, that was the third step of the method. Then I got to another side of the method, another realization. I noticed that a family would come to me and somebody in the family would say, well, that person's an asshole, right?
Yeah.
An awakened spiritual service honoring the opportunity to love energetically. It's a sacred acronym.
Write that down, people. Write that down. Okay.
So, they would say something like that. And then I'm thinking, only that person in the family thinks that. The rest of the people in the family are going, what? Just like you may have a sister or brother has a different view about how your parents were, and you go, what? It's not how I saw them. I have a sister that thought my parents were totally different than I did. And I thought, well, wait a minute now. They have a different set of values. They're challenging that person. When you challenge people's values, they become proud and arrogant and start talking down and critical. And so they're labeling that person based on how they're interacting with them and thinking that's who they were. And these were false facades that they were projecting. And so I started to look at and asking people, so you think your mom was always mean to you, right? Yeah, she's always mean. Everybody saw that. Nobody ever saw her nice to me. She's never nice to me. Really? Go to a moment where and when you perceive your mom nice to you, doing exactly the opposite behavior to what you thought she did. But she didn't. Look again. And then they go, okay, yeah, in this moment, she was nice to me and she did this. Great. Can you see that you were doing things in her values at that time? She goes, yeah. So can you see when you do things in her values, she plays nice. When you go against her values, she plays mean. She's not a mean person. She's a human being with a set of values responding like we all do based on how you're interacting with her. And I made them go in there and find out where they had the exact opposite behavior until it was 50-50 and leveled the playing field. And that dissolved the label that they were projecting and trapped in because they were using all or none labels. And anytime you do that, you have no resilience. You're non-resilient. So I made them go through and find out where the person had the opposite behavior. And when I did that, that was a big opening for people because people go, wow, I blocked out with my subjective bias, my disconfirmation bias, 40 different examples of when my father was extremely generous and nice to me. And I did not know when I walked in here that was there. And by God, they're in tears. They realize I've completely fabricated a false reality about my dad.
And it is amazing that it is everywhere. I mean, I have to do this method every day because on myself and on clients. Yeah.
Yeah. So then the next step was a breakthrough. I was studying, I was writing a big 2-volume textbook on the origin of life. You know, I've written all kind of interesting books on the origin of the universe, the origin of human beings, the origin of life, and physics. So I'd write on all kinds of stuff. But this one was the origin of life. And I was studying redox reactions, which are chemical reactions that are gain and loss of electrons and in between different types of molecules. And when I did that, I had this aha, redox. You never have oxidation without reduction. You never have a gain without a loss. And then I realized, studying neurology, because I taught neurology and I studied physiology and taught pathology, and all of a sudden this boom came up in it, and I realized that you can't have oxidation without a sympathetic response, that the sympathetic nervous system oxidizes, and you can't have reduction without a parasympathetic response. That reduces. Mm-hmm. One acidifies, one alkalinizes. One is for fight or flight, one's for rest and digest. One's for daytime for handling the challenges, one's for night. One deals with the red blood cells for oxidation, and one is the white blood cells for repair. And all of a sudden I got this insight, and I realized they can't come one without the other. So that means that at the moment of perception, this is what William James said, but I heard that, but I didn't put it together till later. At the very moment you're perceiving somebody challenging you, there's somebody supporting you, and vice versa. And your physiology is homeostatic. It has a built-in homeostatic mechanism to bring things into complete equilibrium. Otherwise, your body, if the world out there didn't have an internal homeostatic mechanism inside with a negative feedback system, we would die very quickly. We have these internal feedbacks. So I thought, then the mind has to have that, and it has to be able to create or observe this pair of opposites simultaneously in the mind. And that was I called it the great discovery. It's the greatest discovery I'd ever made on human psychology. And so I started asking, I had to figure out how to do it because it took like 30 minutes to do each case. When I started, I got it down now just 3 seconds. But I basically asked, at the moment when somebody's criticizing you, who's praising you? And they go, nobody. Nobody's there, just this criticizer. I said, close your eyes and get present. Go to the moment where and when you did it and get really present, get the content, get the context, and get really present. And in that moment, watch what your mind has. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh, at the moment they're criticizing me, I heard my mom speaking in my head, saying the opposite. Isn't that interesting? And I made them realize that in either reality or virtual reality, in their imagination, reality or imagination, their mind will homeostate experiences. I found this in rape cases and incest cases and beatings, that the brain dissociates and creates completely opposite content to counterbalance what's there and to maintain homeostasis in the brain. So I started to figure out how to do that. And that was a gold mine on how to dissolve post-traumatic stress and bipolar condition and all types of schizoid behaviors that are coming out of people because of, quote, traumas or ecstatic drug use. So that was the next thing I added to the method, to help people stabilize and see what Wilhelm once said, simultaneous contrasts. I found a way of accessing simultaneous contrast, which meant that the conscious and unconscious mind, as Jung had said, that are separated can now be rejoined and have superconscious awareness. The subconscious mind stores all conscious and unconscious splits, but the superconscious mind stores all conscious and unconscious integrations. And so the executive center integrates and the amygdala separates. And the executive center is for negative feedback systems to integrate, and the amygdala is for positive feedback systems for the survival in order to create adrenaline to capture prey and avoid predator. So I thought, okay, this is just brain physiology, brain anatomy doing its job. I looked at the transmitters. I looked how it worked. I figured it all out. It's just The brain is brilliantly put together for the sake of mastering life. And everything that's going on, it's creating symptoms as a feedback to guide us back to that authentic state where we see both sides and enter into a state of grace, the transcendent state, as Leibniz was saying. Then I went a step further because I realized that many people, when they're in their amygdala, have fantasies about how life's supposed to be. Nice without mean, kind without cruel, because they're wanting prey without predator. So they're wanting pleasure without pain. And that's the whole source of all the positive thinking mentality and the hedonistic pursuits. And almost every bipolar condition comes from that. And all the depressions and all the medications, the entire pharmaceutical industry feeds off that. Mm-hmm. So I went in there and I said, if we take, and the person's depressed, let's say, and resentful, that means they must be comparing what that person did to a fantasy about how they wish it would have been. The opposite behavior. Because if you infatuate with the behavior, you resent its opposite. If you resent a behavior, you infatuate with the opposite. So I started going in there and asked, if they did what you hoped they would have done in the moment you resented them, what would have been the drawback? If they had done the exact opposite trait, the way you fantasized and wished they would have been, what would have been the drawback? Oh, I don't see a drawback. Well, then you're going to be holding on to a fantasy and you're not going to appreciate reality because your reality is compared to a fantasy. And depression is a comparison of your current reality to a fantasy you're addicted to. So I had to go in there and crack the fantasies that people are running. And boy, I found common threads on the fantasies that people have. There are 15 basic ones. There's really more, but there are 15 basic ones that are most consistent delusions that people have and unrealistic expectations they have in life. That people are supposed to live in their values, that people are supposed to be nice, not mean, or just peaceful without wrathful, and the world's supposed to be that way, and they're living in the delusion. And they can't embrace the two sides of life. You know, it's like a magnet has two poles. You can't get a one-sided magnet. The Buddha said the desire for that which is unobtainable and the desire to avoid that which is unavoidable is the source of human suffering. And so they knew that in Buddhism in 600 BC. It's not new, but we just overlook the great wisdom and the perennial philosophy that stood the test of time. Yeah. So I just basically went in and I cracked the fantasies and cracked the nightmares that they were comparing and neutralized that. And when they're done, and that's just the first 14 questions. When they're done, they're speechless. They have tears in their eyes. They have gratitude for the person that they thought they were resentful to. They love themselves. They love the other person, and there's nothing to fix. And there's an order there, and they see everything that was on the way, and they wouldn't change a thing. And now the philosophical question of, is it predestined or is it free will, right? Well, human will and what was called divine will, predestination, or the way it is, all of a sudden united. And the paradox that's been out there for centuries is now no longer a paradox. Because when they're simultaneously in perfect symmetry, there is no paradox. There's nothing to fix in you relative to others or others relative to you. There's just something to be grateful for. And you enter into a state of grace, not a superficial gratitude like when somebody supports you, but a grace when you see the hidden order in the apparent chaos and you realize there's nothing to fix. There's a perfection, and I couldn't improve upon it. And this is what Leibniz knew. Leibniz was aware of that.
Yes. And this is the concept that you speak of all the time. There's nothing you can do or not do that makes you unworthy of love. Exactly. And isn't that what we're all looking for in a two-sided world?
Everything is part of that. Everything is part of that. When you're mean to somebody else is nice. When you're nice, somebody else is mean. You can't throw the matrix off. And there is a real loving matrix. And Paul Dirac has wrote about matrices. And so I started in the field of physics on the matrices. And I realized that there really is a magnificence in this universe. It almost awakens a panpsychic appreciation for the intelligence that permeates the universe. It was Einstein who said on a daily basis, he said, it's enough for me on a daily basis to sit and contemplate the magnificent intelligence that permeates the universe. So he had a belief in that. And I think that it was not an he had no interest in anthropomorphic deities. He had no interest in punishing, rewarding gods. He was interested in the universal laws and the intelligence that obviously underlied those laws that was inherent in nature. I'm a firm appreciator of that because the more I go and probe it, if you go and study the cell, when I was writing a book on the origin of life, when you go down and study the cell, you're humbled. You're humbled. because the intricacies of just the biochemistry and the electronics and the cytoarchitectural dynamics that are going down there are greater than all the Nobel Prize winners, all the great biologists, put them all together, they couldn't do it. And it's there, and it's in the single cell 4.1 billion years ago. It's already there. And it was there. We questioned whether life started 3.9 to 4.1 billion, but it was been pushed back from 3.2 to 3.4 to 3.6, 3.8, 3.9, 4.1. We may find that there was life way back at the beginning. And if so, we have to ask, where's that come from? How's it come about? Is it inherent in the universe? Is there a natural proclivity, as Christian Dove, the Nobel Prize winner, said, there's a natural proclivity for nature to create life? And maybe it's already inherent in the system. It's not a random event. These are questions that make you wonder. And so I'm a firm believer in, since there's a conservation of intelligence in the information in the universe, I can't deny that. I can't confirm it or deny it. We don't have the depth of knowledge to say, but it makes you pause for thought. It makes you live with holy curiosity. It makes you humble yourself before the intelligence that permeates the universe, and makes you have a desire to explore the mysteries that are beyond our comprehension. And even though you may never solve them, it's the pursuit of it that's fulfilling.
Holy curiosity. I'm going to get a tattoo of that somewhere. I love it.
Yeah.
I want to wrap up, even though I could talk to you forever and have like a whole series of podcasts just with you. I want to respect your time. So I want to ask you the question that I always end this podcast with, which is, we've looked at the past and we've looked at the present, and we've sort of bridged and walked that journey together. And I'm curious, if you were to look in a mirror right now, because this podcast is all about removing the external gaze, so that we can get metrics on our value. I mean, it's all what you're talking about, right? It is our ability to look in the mirror and see our own resilience and see our own magnificence, and to self-advocate and self-acknowledge and be self-aware and gain self-mastery. So if you were to look into a mirror and give yourself an opportunity to acknowledge the beautiful journey that you've been on in your own life that you just shared with us, and look towards the future and what is next for you, what is it that you would say in that mirror and have reflected back to you?
Just thank you. There's nothing there except it was part of the perfection. I mean, I don't look back and see any regrets. I don't have anything I wish I'd done differently. And I can't imagine myself doing anything but to continue to explore and continue to read. I read research every single day. I write every single day. I do podcasts or teach every single day. I don't have anything else I'd rather be doing. I've delegated everything. I've delegated everything off my life. I haven't driven a car in 33 years. I haven't cooked since I was 24. I don't do anything but teach, research, write, and travel. The rest of it I've delegated to specialists, so I can do what I feel my calling is in the world. And I love it. I hope to do that as long as I can. That's. And
we are ever so grateful that you do. I can't thank you enough for A, sharing everything that you shared today on this podcast, but B, being such a profound influence in my life and in the lives of those that I get to pass your message on to. I'm eternally grateful, and I'm really thrilled to share you with anybody that is listening to this right now. Thank you so much, Dr. Demartini.
Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you. Join us for Look at Me Now, wherever you listen to podcasts, and be sure to share, like, and subscribe.